Good afternoon. I'm Bob Call, I'm the city manager here at the city of Roanoke, and just want to welcome you to our latest in the series of video recordings that we've been making to help keep our community aware and informed of what's going on with COVID, and in particular with the COVID vaccine. This is actually a third in an ongoing series of videos. The first featured the mayor and Councilmember Joe Cobb and Dr. Morrow from the Department of Health, and it focused on the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. The second actually featured Councilmember Vivian Sanchez Jones, as well as Dr. Gomez from the Carilion Clinic, and focused on FAQs that we were hearing in the community from our Hispanic members and Spanish-speaking members of the community. This particular one features Vice Mayor Trish White Boyd, as well as Councilmember Robert Jeffrey and Dr. Bafo-Bani from Carilion Clinic. And those of you that have been paying attention to COVID all along will hopefully remember that Dr. Bafo-Bani actually was at part of our very, very first press conference all the way back in last March, when the mayor, vice mayor, and Dr. Bafo-Bani addressed the community on, at that point, kind of this emerging sort of threat of COVID. And here we are nearly a year later, still talking, but thankfully talking about a vaccine relative to it. This video will actually be followed in the next couple of weeks by another video focused on our immigrant population and those that also face obstacles such as accessibility to the vaccine as we go along. And we'll certainly provide more information with that. With that, again, I'll introduce the panel, and then I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Bafo-Bani. As mentioned, we have Vice Mayor Trish White Boyd joining us, as well as Councilmember Robert Jeffrey. And of course, again, as mentioned, Dr. Bafo-Bani from Carilion Clinic. And at this point, Doctor, if you wouldn't mind giving us kind of a status report, if you will, on kind of the state of COVID in our community and sort of how the vaccine is kind of playing into where we are currently with the virus. And then we'll come back for some questions.
Thank you for having me, and how time flies. I do remember quite vividly early last year, our discussions and the press conference we had. And at that time, barely had any cases. At present in the US, globally, there are about 104 million cases, 26 million cases in the US, and about 400,000 plus deaths in the US. In Virginia, about 500,000 cases as well. We are seeing, though, a slight downward trend in the trajectory of the number of cases we are seeing. There is also some light at the end of the tunnel in the sense of the COVID vaccines that have currently come on the market, and then those in the pipeline. As you are all aware, we currently have the Moderna vaccine as well as the Pfizer vaccine. And these two vaccines have very good effectiveness in preventing symptomatic disease from COVID or death from COVID. And then there is another vaccine that hopefully will be approved by the FDA mid-February, and that is going to be the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That also has very good, not the same as the Moderna and the Pfizer, but very good effectiveness in fighting or preventing COVID disease. In fact, about 85% effectiveness in preventing people from having severe disease. So all in all, very good news. Now, despite vaccines, we still know that certain common practices work. They've worked before vaccines came, and they will continue to work. And that is hand hygiene, social distancing, and the use of masks. Those are very basic things that we still want to continue doing for a good period of time. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate that update. And at the end of this, you'll certainly hear me reinforce those 3 points that were just made again, because we can't remind folks enough about the need to continue those mitigation practices. So thank you. Vice Mayor, if you want to kind of start with the first question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bafobani, for being here to answer our questions. There's still a lot of questions out there, and I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. The one question that I would ask is COVID-19. A lot of people still want to understand what exactly is COVID-19? How does that virus affect the body for those that are symptomatic? I mean, sometimes it can cause severe illness or sometimes even death. So can you explain to us in layman terms, of course, so that we can understand what is this virus and what is it doing that is affecting our body in the way that it does?
Okay, very good question. So sometime in December of 2019, hence the name COVID-19, a virus was identified in China, Wuhan, China, and it is thought to have been a virus that escaped they have something called the live animal market in Wuhan, China, escaped from animals and then gotten in or infected some persons. And then the virus is able to thrive in one person and then affect another person and affect another person. Now, how does the virus affect or infect people? When we either breathe in the virus or we touch contaminated surfaces and then go on to touch our own mucous membranes in our eyes, the virus gets into our system, usually the upper part of the throat, and then it goes into the lungs and affects the lungs. And hence the respiratory symptoms that this virus can lead to. There are other symptoms, though, that the virus can give. One of them is no symptom at all. And that's the reason we encourage the use of masks in everybody. Just assume you all have it, or we all have it. Everybody wears a mask. We prevent that transmission. That's a common symptom. It's no symptom at all. And then there are other symptoms like the fever, the chills, the body aches, and then the more severe symptoms in about 10% of people who have COVID, especially when you are more mature, about 65, or you have other medical conditions like diabetes, heart attack, stroke. So if you have family members who may have any of those conditions, then you know that if they do get COVID, they are more likely to get very sick. So you want to be around them a cocoon of safety by masking, social distancing, and encouraging them now to get vaccination as well.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know, Dr. Bafobani just kind of mentioned those sort of underlying conditions that contribute to that. And I think, Robert, you had a question that was tied to those underlying conditions. So if you want to take that next question.
Well, yeah, actually, it was more about the vaccination piece.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
More about the vaccination. And I understand that last year there was a Operation Warp Speed that was created to make sure that we can provide vaccination for our community. And the development was very quick. I think because of in the past that there's been vaccinations developed, it's taken over decades and years to develop. And we have one within a year. I guess the question is for the community, is it safe? Now that the vaccinations have several companies have developed vaccinations, it's been quickly developed, but is it safe for our community?
That's a very, very good question. And it's a question that bears being answered carefully, because it's one of the reasons we see people are hesitant to get vaccination. But I'll tell you a little bit about how the FDA goes on in approving medications. So we have what we call the full approval, whereby a medication or a vaccine will go through certain steps, and you have something called emergency use authorization, which also a vaccine or medication will go through certain steps. So let's go through a full approval process for any medication or vaccine. Usually, it requires what we call different stages of studies. We call something phase 1, and then phase 2, and then phase 3. With phase 1 studies, you look to see if whatever medicine or vaccine you are giving to the person is safe. And so you evaluate a certain number of people and look to see if it's safe. Plus, you also look to see what dose do you have to use to effect that, to get that efficacy. Phase 2 trials will then involve more people. And then again, you look at that safety profile as well as the best dosing regimen. And then phase 3 trials looks at thousands of people, and it then looks to see whether your drug is truly effective. And you again look to see whether the drug has some safety issues, because the more people you bring into a study of a medication, you will find things that you didn't find when you looked at just a few people. So for most vaccines, they will look at the phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3. They get about 10,000, 15,000 people. And then you wait for about 6 months to 1 year. And if you've looked at all the safety elements and everything is, let's use the word copacetic, then you say the drug is approved. With the current COVID vaccines, they went through the phase 1 trial just like all vaccines do, the same timeline. They went through the phase 2 trials just like all vaccines do, the same timeline. They went through the phase 3 trials just like all vaccines do, but the ability to recruit a lot more people because of the number of people who have COVID is such that we are able to get and finish your phase 3 trials sooner than a condition which happens very rarely, and so it takes time to get the number of people to enroll. Like chickenpox, you hardly see people with chickenpox. So if you're doing a trial for chickenpox, you're probably going to take 10 years looking for people with chickenpox all over. Lots of people have COVID, and so you are able to get the number of people. The trials as a whole, Moderna had about 30,000, Pfizer 45,000 people. That is even better than lots of drug trials and vaccine trials in the past. So why the emergency use authorization? Why didn't it then just get a full authorization? This is where the slight difference is. So after all the trials had been done and we figured that this is effective, we still want to make sure that it's safe. And so we waited 2 months, which is usually the time if you're going to see side effects, you're going to see it in most medications. And usually you see it around 1 month, around the time it's given to about a month. So you wait 2 months. And after that is when the drug was given or the vaccines were given their emergency use authorization. Having said that, to date, we are still monitoring any possible side effects using the CDC VSafe as well as the VAERS, it's a Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, to monitor for any possible side effects. So these 2 vaccines, and in fact, all the COVID vaccines, have gone through very rigorous trials.
And can I follow up, Dr. Baffelbunny? You mentioned about the trials. What was the demographics of the people that were involved in the trials? You mentioned it was 25,000, I believe. You mentioned Montana and so forth. Where in these trials, was there any effort to make sure that we had especially people of color, minority community involved in the trials?
Yes. So some of the trials, specifically the Pfizer trial, was done in multiple countries, including South Africa, and mostly Africans in South Africa, done in the US, in parts of Europe, as well as in other countries. The percentage of Latinx was about 26-20 in both trials, and the percentage of African Americans around 10% in both trials as well. So for the US, the percentage 10% does represent, is a representative sample of the population for the most part.
Thank you, Doctor.
Great, thank you. Trish, you want to take the next question?
Yes, I do. Before I go to my question, Dr. Baffelbani, you mentioned Be Safe, and I think that's a wonderful platform, but a lot of people are not familiar with it. So I'm going to ask our city manager if maybe at the end of this presentation, we could put that link up, because that is a process of following up with people who've already gotten the vaccine so they can record their experience, and that's how you get that data. But nobody really talks about it and really don't use it. So I'm glad you mentioned that earlier, and hopefully we can add that link or that information to this presentation afterwards. But so now we've done all that research and all that study, and we've gotten emergency approval for the 2 vaccines. Now we've got some mutation. We've got a couple more strands floating around out there. And so we're getting questions about the efficacy of the 2 vaccines. Are they going to work against these 2 variants that have just recently emerged?
Very good question. So it's interesting, and there's never a dull day in the COVID world. So there is the vaccine that's thought to be from the UK, the B117. There is a mutation there's a mutation from the UK thought to be the B117. There's another mutation from South Africa, and then there is another mutation that is thought to be from Brazil, or from Brazil origin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, some of these vaccine trials were done in Europe as well as in South Africa. And so the groups, or the Pfizer, Moderna, have gone back and looked at the efficacy of these vaccines when they have immunized, when you are immunized or vaccinated, and they draw your blood and then check it against these new viruses. Does the vaccine, or does your blood sample get rid of the viruses? It does. It does. For the British one, it does to the same effectiveness as the current strain walking around. For the South African and the Brazilian, it is slightly less in terms of its efficacy. There is some reduced efficacy, but that is in the test tube. What does that mean clinically in the population? We do not know with full confidence yet. However, we do know that these vaccines were given in South Africa. These vaccines are being given in Brazil, and people who have received the vaccines have done well. And so clinically, we expect that people will continue to do well on these vaccines based on the current variants we have.
So I guess the answer would be yes, based on the information that we have thus far.
Yes, based on the information we have thus far, yes. I would get the vaccine again if I would get the vaccine. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trish and Dr. Baffelbani. Robert, I know, I know you have some other questions. I want to ask you a question as well as a part of this. It's pretty well known that you were running for office, actually, to get elected to the council. You unfortunately actually contracted the virus. You had COVID, and yet I also know that at this point you are obviously awaiting your turn for the vaccine. And so, one of the questions, of course, is, well, if you've had COVID, why is it important for you to still pursue that vaccine? So if you wouldn't mind just sort of sharing your personal story with that, I think that might be of interest as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Bob. During the campaign, I did have experienced COVID, as well as my wife. and the symptoms were pretty traumatic. I mean, the fatigue part really impacted both my wife and myself. Fortunately, I have a history of asthma in my family, so I was very concerned about my respiratory um, functions. However, it didn't impact me. It did impact my wife, and we were even contemplating almost on the verge of whether she would have to be admitted. Unfortunately, she started to recover fairly quickly before we made that decision. But we did experience fatigue during that process. Um, we were consulted by Roanoke Allegheny Health Department, and at that time, my wife and I, we had to be separated. We was in different bedrooms during that period of time. And so we were literally in the bed, texting each other from different bedrooms, just checking on each other and making sure. I'm pretty sure my wife was excited about that because she did miss my snoring in that process. But it was pretty traumatic to go through that process. And we was very fortunate to have friends and family to help us provide meals. And also we worked on taking different supplements. Trish, you mentioned about vitamin D, and we took zinc and 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 B12 to make sure we get our energy back. And it was a process that lasted for us, we went through the 14-day quarantine period. And I think we needed all of those days to get through it. So it was definitely an interesting experience. And I guess one of my questions, even with that, Dr. Baffelbani, was, is there any scientific way about side effects from COVID, or long-lasting side effects from that? Again, I still occasionally battle fatigue. Occasionally, my wife especially battle fatigue, and she takes iron pills as well to make sure that her strength is fine. But there's a moment, pause there, where we have to take a seat and just and gather our energy. Is there any long after effects going after the quarantine period?
So thank you for sharing your story, and it's very, very moving. It's a very difficult question to answer, and the reason is we've just had this disease around since 2019, so it may take some time for us to get an understanding, a full understanding of how long people have symptoms and whether symptoms persist and stay on. We do know, though, or we're beginning to see that there are some people who will have fatigue and it will stay on for a long time. And there are some people who have some issues with memory or other, things like headaches, and that can sometimes stay on for a period of time. It's not too common, but we do see that. Mostly probably the fatigue is the one we see the most as ongoing. We don't know presently, given that we haven't had this disease around for too long, how these things will sort of pan out, and whether they pan out after 3, 6, 9 months. So there's more to come on that. I think that's actually sobering, and it tells us that the best thing to do is to get a vaccine, because again, the vaccine prevents you, the two we have, 95% from having symptomatic disease. Now, and that's perfect. You're not going to get into the hospital. You don't have the symptoms. Even if you get infected, you may just have a sniffle or something. I will take sniffles any day over anything else. So that's one key thing that I think, again, speaks to the importance of vaccination.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you know, Robert, thank you also for sharing that. And I'm glad, obviously, that you and your wife are doing better. And I think that really reinforces the value and the importance of the vaccine, to try to avoid as many of the things that have been described as has come up in this conversation as well. Trish,
Absolutely.
oh, go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
No, I agree with you, Bob. I think going through that experience kind of reinforced the need to be vaccinated, because
Yeah.
I definitely do not want to go through that experience again. I definitely don't. So it's definitely a need to do that. I'm on a waiting list because I know we're prioritizing our vaccination, but I personally can't wait till my name is or a number is called up for me to take this vaccine. I think it's important to do it.
Very good. Thank you. And Trish, I know because of the work that you do, you have actually received the vaccine. Matter of fact, some of our folks followed you and actually recorded you getting that vaccine and have been able to broadcast that as well. I also know that, just recently, I think actually yesterday, you actually hosted a conversation similar to this that included Dr. Morrow from the Department of Health. So I didn't know if there was anything that came up in that conversation that you wanted to kind of highlight in this conversation as well, or any other question that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I thank you, Mr. Cowell. It was a great conversation. We did talk about some of the myths that were out there. They were able to dispel some of them. What I did reiterate, and I will say it again here in this forum, is that these myths are real and legitimate to the people that believe them. And so we put a lot of emphasis on trying to dispel those rumors. And I will mention one here in just a second, but I also wanted to say that even Dr. Baffelbani is saying, make sure you get the vaccine. We want everybody to get the vaccine. But one point that was made last night, and it's a valid point, is that there is a priority and there is not enough vaccine. So we do want people to get the vaccine. And that's what this is all about, encouraging our community to take the vaccine. But by that same token, we have to also make sure that they realize that that vaccine is not going to come next week, or even the week after, or even next month, maybe. It could be May or June before, this community is completely vaccinated. So I just want people to understand that, because we spent a lot of time and a lot of energy saying, we want you to get the vaccine. And then they say, okay, I want to get it. And then we say, okay, but you got to wait 3 months. So just be aware of that. But Dr. Baffelbani, a lot of the misnomers came up, or some of the myths came up. One of them was about, does it change your DNA? Does it make you sterile? And we take these serious, because for the people who believe this, and I have someone that works in my office that came to me and said, hey, I heard it changes your DNA. And my first thought was, how is that possible? But we have to realize that these things are real, and these are some real concerns. So if you don't mind, like, addressing some of those myths, kind of just dispelling them, really quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but just to let people know that are watching this, that these vaccines are safe and that those things are probably not true.
No, it doesn't change your DNA. It doesn't at all. It doesn't get anywhere near your DNA. And so it doesn't have that ability to change your DNA. And you are right, these misnomers are harmful and prevent people who need to get the vaccine from getting it.
Yeah, and I want to address one other issue that has come up that's pertinent to this conversation, and then I'm going to let Dr. Baffelbani kind of give any closing thoughts regarding this. One of those, and one of the reasons we're doing these conversations specifically focused on our Hispanic community as well as our African American community, is an acknowledgement and a recognition that there is a disparity in who has current access to the vaccine or who's getting vaccinated. That is, it's a national story right now. It's not just unique to our locality. And fortunately here, it's an issue that was recognized very early by the health district. And so Dr. Morrow has been very committed, as has Carilion Clinic, in trying to address those issues. Some of the reasons for that are that the way in which you register, for example, is all computer-based. And so that automatically makes it hard for some that don't have access to reliable technology or just don't feel comfortable with it. That has been one of the challenges. The other is some of these things that we've talked about that are myths or misnomers that have kind of kept folks away from the vaccine or pursuing it. There are, as a result of that, the local health district encouraged the locality and a lot of our community members to help them. And so we've actually, just this week, actually have had a couple of working group meetings made up of representatives from those two communities to help us really understand how we can overcome some of the hurdles about getting registered. And some of the ideas that have come up, for example, are registration drives or a phone bank, some other way in which folks can readily get registered for the vaccine. And also then the VDH has introduced the idea of having these strike teams, which are really kind of remote vaccine clinics. Right now, you access the vaccine predominantly through going to a mass vaccination site like Berglund, and that will still continue to be the major way in which that's delivered. But there's a recognition that that will not serve all of our populations adequately or well. And so this group that I referenced is also talking about where does it make sense to have those areas in those communities where they can actually, in their neighborhood, go and get vaccinated, still through a registration process. So those are just two kind of initiatives that are underway to try to overcome what has been very early recognized as really an inadequacy in being able to reach the full diversity of our community. And there's a lot more about that coming out in conversation, I think, over the next couple of weeks as we try to partner with the local health district in closing that gap. So I know that has been certainly top of mind, just as it was with testing. That was the same kind of issue with testing, and we ultimately overcame those challenges, and we're going to overcome these challenges as well. So just wanted to highlight that. And I wanted to give you, Dr. Bafobani, kind of an opportunity to sort of any other last thoughts that you have relative to the virus or the vaccine, and then I'll close us out as well.
Okay. I don't think I could say it any more eloquently what you just described. I think the work you're doing engaging communities is extremely important. Finding influential people within the community, peers who have either had COVID and can speak to it, or who have had the vaccine and can speak to it. And it's extremely important in sort of decreasing the vaccine hesitancy as we are seeing. I got my vaccine. My second shot was in January because I'm in healthcare worker and work with COVID patients. And the first one was, I didn't have any, side effects after. The second shot, somewhere around 3 a.m., I woke up and I'm not sure who woke me up, whether to go pee or because I was shaking. But after 2 hours, that was it. Again, I was happy that I'd had that slight thing. It tells me I built some immunity. My body is now primed. And so if it does see the virus, it's done the dress rehearsal already and will quickly jump in and take care of the virus so it doesn't get into my lungs and other parts of the body and cause severe disease. And I think when it gets to each person's turn, obviously we're starting with seniors and then go down, in terms of risk. When it gets to everybody's turn, we want to do that. We want to do that to protect our loved ones, not just from the virus, but one way of protecting your loved one is staying alive for them, so you can be at their graduation or stuff like that. And the disease is real, so we need to make sure that we are doing everything to protect ourselves.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Bafobani, and thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. I think it is, in each of these conversations we've had, we've really wanted to ensure that we have a voice of expertise in addition to the community voice. So I really appreciate you filling that role. Certainly the partnership we have with Carilion Clinic and with the local health district in addressing this and really taking on this virus is critical. So I greatly appreciate the support. Certainly, Vice Mayor White Boyd, as always, thank you for participating in this and your willingness to be a part of this. And Councilmember Robert Jeffrey as well. Very much appreciate that your willingness to do this and really help us get the word out into the community about why this is so important. Also want to thank our interpreter for the sign language portion of this as well, for those that benefit from that service as well. As I mentioned, this is a series, and we hope this will be posted up on our YouTube site and out on our social media for those to view that that wish to do so. Again, in the next week or so, we hope to have the next one in this series focused on our immigrant population, as well as, again, those that face other challenges such as disabilities or others, and how they can actually access the vaccine and what questions they might be having in their communities as well. I'll end this as I have ended all of the other ones, and as Dr. Bafobani started us with, which is whether you've had the vaccine or not, it is critical that we continue as a community to practice those practices that keep us and our families and our neighbors safe. So make sure that we obviously practice good hand washing, hygiene, make certain that we maintain our social distance. If you are ill at all, then you stay home and away from others. And of course, wearing the face covering when you cannot maintain that social distance or when you're indoors with others. That's all going to remain critical as we work through, as Vice Mayor said, these next several months actually that it will take to get the community vaccinated to where we can return to some version of normal. So again, thank you all for being willing to do this, and look forward to the continued conversation. So thank you.